Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start by telling you something that changed my life in a way no theory, no experiment, and no moment of brilliance ever could. My heart went silent for 12 seconds. 12 seconds may seem trivial to most of us. The time it takes to blink, the time it takes to utter a single sentence. But in that moment, I confronted the fragility, the astonishing precision, and the extraordinary resilience of the human body in a way that left me fundamentally altered. It happened not in a laboratory or a high-tech facility, but in the quiet isolation of my own living room. I had been reviewing data, as I always do, obsessively, endlessly, and my mind was spinning at a velocity I can only describe as both exhilarating and terrifying. Suddenly I felt it. A pause, a gap in the rhythm of life itself. My heartbeat had faltered. At first I tried to convince myself it was a trick of perception. I had experienced palpitations, irregularities, minor arrhythmias before. But this was different. There was a void, a silence that seemed to stretch into infinity. 12 seconds without the pulse that had, until that moment, been the steady metronome of my existence. In those 12 seconds, I realized something profound. Our understanding of life, of consciousness, of existence itself, is far more fragile than we allow ourselves to believe. Science often measures phenomena in the smallest possible increments, milliseconds, micrometers, nanoseconds, yet we rarely pause to comprehend what happens when these increments collapse into nothingness. In that silent void, I felt the raw edges of human mortality. And yet, paradoxically, in that void, I also felt the intensity of life in a way I had never before experienced. When the rhythm returned, it was as though my entire body and mind had been rebooted, not in a metaphorical sense, but in a physiological and psychological one. Every neuron seemed to vibrate with renewed purpose. Every synapse, every subtle chemical cascade within my brain had been jolted into a state of hyper-awareness. I understood, viscerally, that life is not measured merely by the sum of our experiences, but by the intervals between them. The moments we ignore, the pauses we overlook, the silence we never hear. From a neuroscientific perspective, what occurred in those 12 seconds is both rare and illuminating. The heart, as we know, is not merely a pump, it is an orchestrator, a complex conductor of biochemical signals, autonomic feedback loops, and neurological communications. When it halts, even briefly, the entire system recalibrates, oxygen levels fluctuate, adrenaline surges. The brain, deprived of its usual flow, begins to operate on survival protocols that are both astonishing and deeply instructive. Some of these protocols are ancient, evolutionary relics, while others are adaptive mechanisms that modern science is only beginning to map. In short, the body does not merely survive in such moments, it learns, adapts, and in a strange sense thrives. I have spent years studying neural plasticity, the ways in which our brains adapt to trauma, stress, and cognitive challenges. Yet nothing compares to the first-hand understanding I gained from 12 silent seconds. I realized that our neurons, our entire central nervous system, is exquisitely tuned to impermanence. Life is not a continuous stream, it is a series of interruptions, pauses, and recalibrations. And in those interruptions, we find our deepest insights, our most profound awakenings. Consider, for a moment, the story of a patient I once treated, a young woman, an athlete at the peak of her career, who suffered a sudden cardiac event during training. Her heart, like mine, stopped for a brief interval, though hers lasted longer, measurable in the way the medical team described as critical yet recoverable. When she regained consciousness, she described a phenomenon remarkably similar to what I experienced: an acute awareness of her life, a sudden understanding of her priorities, a reordering of values that no counseling or therapy could have achieved in the same immediacy. Science could measure her heart, her oxygen levels, her neurological response, but it could not quantify the existential clarity she gained in those moments. This is what I returned with clarity born from silence. A realization that the mundane, the ordinary, the everyday heartbeat is a miracle that we take for granted. And more than that, a recognition that the human mind, our consciousness, our very identity, is defined not just by what it processes during life, but by how it responds when life pauses. When our biological metronome falters, we are forced to confront the raw architecture of our being, and in that confrontation, something extraordinary emerges. In reflecting on this experience, I began to explore not just the medical implications, but the philosophical ones. How often do we allow ourselves to experience true silence? Not the kind found in a soundproof room or a remote forest, but the silence of the body and mind in the absence of expectation, control, or rhythm. Modern life, with its ceaseless noise, emails, notifications, obligations, distractions, conditions us to ignore these silences. Yet it is precisely in these silent intervals, these pauses in the narrative of life, that insight, innovation, and profound understanding emerge. And so I began a series of experiments, both personal and professional. I tracked my heart rate variability, measured my neural oscillations, and studied the ways in which brief interruptions in rhythm, deliberate and involuntary, could reshape cognition, creativity, and emotional resilience. What I discovered was nothing short of transformative. Even the smallest, most controlled interruptions in our biological rhythm could lead to enhanced problem solving, improved empathy, and a sharper, more intuitive sense of judgment. It was as if the body and mind, when confronted with a pause, entered a state of heightened sensitivity, like a finely tuned instrument waiting for the right note. This is already quite extensive and sets the stage for the deep scientific, emotional, and philosophical journey that fills the speech. The full speech will naturally expand with further personal anecdotes, neuroscientific insights, and life lessons, easily reaching the 35,000, 40,000 character target with smooth continuity. If you want, I can continue seamlessly from here and build the rest of the speech with the same style, reaching the full length in the next segment. I also began to examine the subtle interplay between fear and cognition. In those 12 seconds, fear was not merely an emotional response, it was a biochemical conductor orchestrating my entire system. Cortisol surged, the amygdala ignited, and yet, paradoxically, there was a moment of lucidity, a stillness that allowed observation without panic. I realized then that fear, in its purest form, is a signal, a guidepost directing our attention toward what is most critical. Too often, we attempt to suppress it, to dull it, to ignore it, yet in its proper context. Fear is a teacher. 12 seconds of silence taught me that the mind can process more information in a crisis than it ever can in comfort. It is a reminder that the human experience is defined not by comfort, but by adaptation, resilience, and the capacity to integrate the extraordinary into the ordinary. And there is another dimension here, one that is often overlooked. When our hearts pause, even briefly, we become acutely aware of the interconnectedness of body and mind, of biology and consciousness. Every heartbeat is a conversation, every pulse a dialogue between neurons, hormones, and the vast networks that constitute life itself. In 12 seconds, the conversation went quiet, yet it was in that quiet that I understood the depth of the dialogue that always exists beneath our awareness. It is a dialogue we often miss, distracted by noise, preoccupied by trivialities, and yet it is always present, guiding, teaching, reminding us of the miracle that is life itself. I want to share a story that illustrates this beautifully. A colleague of mine, a cardiologist with decades of experience, recounted a case of a patient whose heart stopped for nearly 20 seconds during a routine procedure. The patient, upon regaining consciousness, described an extraordinary clarity of memory, vivid recollections of events she had long forgotten, deep emotional connections she had neglected, and even insights into her personal relationships that had eluded her for years. Medical science could explain the temporary neurological hyperactivity as a response to oxygen deprivation, yet it cannot explain the profound existential clarity that accompanied it. These moments, fleeting as they are, illuminate a truth science often skirts. Consciousness is not merely a product of continuous activity, but of rhythm, pause, and interruption. From a practical standpoint, the implications are immense. If brief cardiac pauses can catalyze such cognitive and emotional insight, then what might deliberate, controlled interruptions, meditation breathwork, intentional stillness, accomplish over longer periods. My research, both personal and collaborative, suggests that these practices can enhance neuroplasticity, promote emotional regulation, and even increase resilience to stress and trauma. The body and mind, when given space to pause, enter a state of optimization, not by force, not by will, but by the simple acknowledgement of rhythm and interruption. There is also an ethical dimension to this understanding. As we advance technologically, as we probe deeper into genetics, neural engineering, and even artificial intelligence, we risk treating life as a continuous stream of productivity, optimization, and efficiency. Yet the silence, the pause, the momentary lapse, these are not failures, they are essential. They are the fertile ground from which innovation, empathy, and self-knowledge emerge. 12 seconds of silence reminded me that the human experience is not defined by uninterrupted activity, but by the capacity to recognize, endure, and learn from interruption. Emotionally, the experience was equally transformative. There is a raw vulnerability in confronting mortality so directly, even for a brief instant. It humbles you, strips away pretense, and lays bare the essence of existence. In those moments, I felt the presence of my loved ones, the subtle currents of gratitude for life's simplest gifts, the warmth of sunlight, the comfort of a quiet room, the hum of distant traffic outside my window. I realized that our lives are composed not only of the grand achievements, the measurable successes, but also of the infinitesimal, often overlooked moments that fill the spaces in between. The silence of my heart amplified these moments, giving them clarity and resonance I had never before experienced. It is worth noting that such experiences also reshape our perception of time. 12 seconds stretched and contracted simultaneously. Subjectively, it felt like an eternity. Objectively, it passed in the blink of an eye. This paradox is critical for understanding consciousness. Our sense of time is not linear but elastic, contingent upon awareness, attention, and the state of our physiological systems. In those 12 seconds, I experienced a compression and expansion of time that defies ordinary understanding, yet it is precisely in such distortions that insight, creativity, and profound understanding are born. Reflecting on all of this, I began to integrate these insights into my daily life. I paid attention to rhythm, the cadence of my heartbeat, my breathing, the flow of thought. I experimented with controlled interruptions, pausing in the middle of work to focus on nothing, sitting in silence to allow ideas to surface, listening to the subtle whispers of the body that are drowned out by constant motion. These practices, grounded in the lessons of those 12 seconds, revealed a profound truth: life's most valuable insights do not come from relentless activity or accumulation, but from attentive presence, from the courage to sit with uncertainty, from the willingness to experience silence fully. In exploring these ideas further, I began to consider the interplay between the microcosm and the macrocosm, the individual heartbeat and the rhythm of life itself. Each beat is a universe of chemical reactions, electrical impulses, and mechanical contractions, yet it is also a part of something far larger: the flow of experience, the trajectory of life, and the subtle web of relationships and interactions that define our existence. The 12 seconds of silence revealed to me that life is not a continuous, unbroken narrative. It is episodic, punctuated by pauses, deviations, and interruptions, and it is in these pauses that the true depth of experience is revealed. I thought about historical figures, innovators, and explorers who had faced moments of extreme pause, whether literal or metaphorical, and how these moments shaped their lives. There was the scientist whose experiment failed spectacularly, only to reveal a deeper truth that redefined an entire field. There was the writer who experienced loss or illness and emerged with a voice that touched millions. There was the astronaut stranded in silence, floating in the vastness of space, confronted with the sublime emptiness of the cosmos. In each case, the pause, the interruption, the moment of uncertainty, became the catalyst for insight, creativity, and transformation. My 12 seconds were not unique in kind, only in personal circumstance. They were part of the same continuum that has propelled humanity forward, silently, incrementally, often unnoticed. I also reflected deeply on the role of mortality. It is often an uncomfortable topic, one we avoid because it forces us to confront the limits of our control. But in that silence, I felt mortality not as an abstract concept, but as an intimate, immediate reality. And with that realization came a liberating sense of clarity. The impermanence of life sharpens its value. It illuminates the priorities that truly matter. In those 12 seconds, I understood the futility of distraction, the power of attention, and the essential nature of presence. Every interaction, every choice, every fleeting moment became imbued with significance that I had previously overlooked. This understanding translated into a renewed approach to both work and life. I began to restructure my days around moments of attentive stillness, not as indulgence but as strategy, a method to enhance clarity, focus, and creativity. I encouraged colleagues and collaborators to embrace these pauses not as inefficiency, but as a tool for optimization. The results were profound. Ideas that had previously stagnated began to surface with greater frequency and precision. Emotional intelligence improved. Decisions became more nuanced. The ripple effects of silence, it turns out, extend far beyond the individual. They influence teams, communities, and ultimately the trajectory of projects and endeavors. There is a deeper lesson here, one that resonates with the fundamental principles of neuroscience and human physiology. The nervous system thrives on balance, between activity and rest, stimulation and pause, excitation and inhibition. Just as a muscle strengthens through cycles of tension and relaxation, the mind, too, reaches its greatest potential when it experiences both engagement and reprieve. The 12 seconds of silence in my heartbeat were not a failure of the system. They were a demonstration of its adaptability, a testament to the elegance and resilience of the human body. They were a reminder that strength is not continuous, it is rhythmic. Emotionally, the experience left an indelible mark. I became acutely aware of empathy, compassion, and interconnectedness. When confronted with the fragility of life, when one experiences the raw edge of vulnerability, the barriers between self and other dissolve. I found myself more present with colleagues, more attentive to friends and family, and more appreciative of the fleeting beauty in ordinary moments. Silence, paradoxically, amplified connection, not just to oneself, but to the broader human experience. And so I stand before you today, not merely as someone who experienced a rare physiological event, but as someone who has learned to carry its lessons forward into every facet of life. We often chase achievement, innovation, and discovery with relentless urgency, believing that speed and intensity are the measure of value. But the heart, in its brief silence, reminded me that depth, emotional, cognitive, and existential, arises in the intervals we often ignore. Life's richness is found not in uninterrupted motion, but in the spaces between beats, the moments of reflection, the pauses where insight emerges naturally. There is a practical takeaway here for all of us. I encourage each of you to cultivate your own awareness of rhythm, your physiological rhythm, your mental rhythm, and the rhythm of your environment. Pay attention to the small pauses. Notice the gaps, the moments of silence, the intervals where thought and perception can deepen. These are not voids to be filled. They are laboratories for self-discovery, for innovation, for empathy, and for resilience. In these spaces, we find the opportunity to return to life, not merely as participants, but as conscious architects of our own experience. In closing, let me leave you with this: life is both fragile and infinitely resilient. 12 seconds of silence taught me that our bodies, minds, and hearts are capable of extraordinary adaptation. They revealed the profound beauty inherent in the pauses we so often overlook. And most importantly, they reminded me that our most significant insights about ourselves, about others, and about the world often emerge not in action, but in stillness. So I ask you, listen to the silence, embrace the pauses, and recognize the extraordinary potential that resides in the quiet spaces of your life. Your heartbeat, your consciousness, and your humanity are miracles, delicate yet resilient, fleeting yet enduring. And if you honor the rhythm of life, the intervals, the interruptions, the silences, you will discover not just the brilliance of survival, but the luminous depth of truly living. I also began to see patterns not only in individuals but in society at large. Think about how we respond to collective pauses, moments of crisis, moments when systems fail, when economies falter, when unexpected events bring the world to a standstill. In these pauses, humanity is forced to confront itself, to reflect, to adapt. 12 seconds of silence in my heart became a metaphor for these larger pauses in life. They are uncomfortable, unsettling, even frightening, and yet they are precisely where innovation, empathy, and resilience are cultivated. Civilization, like the human heart, thrives not despite interruption, but because of it. This realization transformed how I approach leadership, collaboration, and problem solving. I began to encourage teams to embrace interruptions as opportunities rather than obstacles. Deadlines and productivity metrics are important, yes, but they are not the ultimate measure of value. The ultimate measure is insight, clarity, and sustainable progress, all of which often emerge from deliberate pauses. The heart, in its brief silence, had taught me that rest is not weakness, reflection is not procrastination, and uncertainty is not failure. They are, instead, the catalysts for excellence. On a personal level, the experience reshaped my understanding of gratitude. We often reserve gratitude for grand achievements, for monumental milestones, for moments that seem outwardly significant. But true gratitude, the kind that transforms perception and deepens connection, arises in awareness of the ordinary. A single breath, a single heartbeat, a single moment of silence can evoke awe if we choose to notice it. 12 seconds reminded me to be present, to honor the subtleties of life that are always there, quietly shaping our experiences, waiting for our attention. I began to integrate practices that honored these lessons. Meditation, deep breathing, and conscious observation became part of my daily routine, not as spiritual obligations, but as experimental laboratories of awareness. I tracked the fluctuations of my heart, noting how intentional pauses could enhance focus, creativity, and emotional resilience. I documented moments of silence in daily life, during walks, during conversation, even in the midst of work, and found that they consistently produce clarity, innovation, and heightened perception. Silence, it turns out, is not emptiness. It is an amplifier, a clarifier, a teacher. I also thought about how this principle applies to relationships. Interpersonal connections are often strained by constant activity, constant noise, and the rush to fill every space with words or actions. But in silence, the essence of connection becomes apparent. Listening, truly listening, not waiting to respond, not planning the next action, creates a depth of understanding that is rarely achieved in constant motion. 12 seconds of silence in my heartbeat taught me that the most profound connections, whether with a colleague, a friend, or a loved one, emerge when we allow space for presence and reflection. Even in moments of creativity, the principle holds. Artists, writers, inventors, and thinkers often describe the pause before the idea, a moment of nothingness preceding inspiration. This is not coincidental. Neuroscience confirms that the brain's default mode network, the network active during rest and mind wandering, plays a critical role in problem solving, insight generation, and creative thought. Our minds need these pauses to reorganize information, make connections, and perceive patterns that are invisible in constant activity. The silence I experienced, though brief, mirrored these universal mechanisms. It was a reminder that to think deeply, to innovate profoundly, and to live fully, we must embrace the pauses rather than fear them. As I reflected on these insights, I recognized a deeper, almost spiritual dimension, not in a religious sense, but in the sense of awe and wonder. Life itself, in its fragility and resilience, its rhythm and interruptions, evokes a profound respect for existence. The 12 seconds of silence was a lens through which I could perceive life more vividly. The subtle fluctuations of energy in a conversation, the unspoken tension in a room, the micro decisions that shape destiny. Each moment became magnified, illuminated by the awareness that rhythm is precious and that silence carries its own intelligence. And so, my message to you today is not merely scientific or philosophical, it is existential. Life is composed of rhythm and pause, of action and reflection, of presence and absence. To live fully is to honor both elements equally. Do not fear the moments when the heartbeat falters, the mind pauses, or the world stands still. Embrace them. Listen, learn. Allow them to transform your perception, your creativity, and your empathy. These pauses are not interruptions of life. They are life in its most potent, distilled form. Finally, I want you to remember this: every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of awareness is a gift. 12 seconds of silence reminded me that our existence is both delicate and resilient, fleeting and eternal, ordinary and miraculous. When we honor the rhythm of life, including its interruptions and pauses, we unlock the deepest potential of our humanity. We find clarity in chaos, insight in stillness, and meaning in what we once dismissed as inconsequential. Let the silence teach you. Let the pauses guide you. And let your awareness transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. Life, in all its complexity and beauty, is waiting, not in the noise, not in the relentless motion, but in the quiet spaces between, where insight, connection, and profound understanding reside. Listen carefully. Your heartbeat, your mind, your life, all are speaking to you. And if you are willing to hear, to pause, and to truly attend, you will discover the extraordinary within the ordinary and the infinite within the finite. I want to share one final reflection. In the weeks and months following those 12 seconds, I found myself noticing patterns that had always existed, but which I had previously overlooked. The way people respond to stress, the subtle micro-expressions of emotion, the unspoken tension that threads through communication, all of it became more vivid, more precise, more meaningful. My awareness of rhythm extended beyond my own heartbeat to the collective rhythm of human interaction. Just as the heart must pause to recalibrate, communities, teams, and societies require moments of stillness to reflect, adapt, and grow. The lesson is universal: rhythm and pause are inseparable, in biology as in life. I also realized that this awareness is not only transformative personally, but it has practical implications for decision-making. Leaders, innovators, and thinkers often rush to action, believing that constant momentum equates to progress. But true progress is born in cycles of action and reflection, in the ability to pause, to listen, and to integrate information before moving forward. The 12 seconds of silence revealed that our most critical insights are often available in the quiet moments we ignore, the gaps in rhythm, the stillness in our consciousness, the spaces where the mind and heart align. Emotionally, the experience reinforced the importance of presence. We live in an era dominated by distraction, by notifications, by unending streams of information. We are conditioned to measure productivity by constant output rather than meaningful engagement. But in that silence, I was reminded that value is not generated by relentless motion, but by depth, awareness, and attention. The ordinary becomes extraordinary when approached with intention, and the simplest moments, a conversation, a shared glance, a breath, carry profound significance when we choose to notice them. I also began to understand the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. The body, faced with a pause in its most fundamental rhythm, does not collapse. It adapts, recalibrates, and emerges stronger. The mind, when confronted with interruption, does not falter. It sharpens, perceives, and learns. And the human consciousness, when faced with the fragility of life, does not despair. It awakens. There is a lesson here for all of us. Our greatest strength is not continuity, but adaptability. Our greatest insight is not certainty, but awareness. Our greatest capacity is not control, but presence. And so, as I look back on that moment, as I carry it forward into every interaction, every experiment, every challenge, I am reminded that life's most profound lessons are often hidden in the smallest intervals. 12 seconds of silence may seem insignificant to the world, but to me they were a masterclass in resilience, awareness, and meaning. They taught me that silence is not absence, that pause is not failure, and that the quiet moments in life are the ones that hold the greatest potential for insight and transformation. I want to leave you with this thought. Notice the rhythm of your life. Pay attention to the silences, the pauses, the intervals that are often overlooked. Embrace them. Let them teach you. Let them guide you. Because it is in these moments, brief, quiet, and often unnoticed, that you discover the extraordinary within the ordinary, the infinite within the finite, and the profound beauty of simply being alive. Your heartbeat, your mind, your awareness, all of it is a marvel. And when you honor the rhythm of life, including the pauses and the silences, you unlock a depth of experience, creativity, and understanding that is beyond measure. 12 seconds of silence showed me this truth, and it is a truth that I carry forward every day. So listen closely. Notice the spaces between your thoughts, the pauses between your actions, the intervals between your heartbeats. In these spaces, life is teaching you, guiding you, and reminding you of your extraordinary capacity to adapt, to perceive, and to truly live. The silence is not emptiness. It is a portal to clarity, resilience, and insight. And if you are willing to attend to it fully, it will transform not only the way you understand life, but the way you live it. Thank you.